Coming up next on This Week in Computer Hardware, building a gaming PC for Titanfall, a solid $35 CPU cooler, high-speed RAM benchmark, new GeForce GTX 800M mobile GPUs, new Haswell Nook, and look at Razer's new keys. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 258, recorded March 13th, 2014. Building a PC for Titanfall.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Ting.com. Ting is a mobile phone service that makes sense. Save money with Ting. Pay only for what you use. Ting doesn't require a contract and offers unlimited devices on one shared plan. To save $25 on your first Ting device, visit twitch.ting.com. That's twitch.ting.com.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm your host, Patrick Norton, and this is the weekly podcast where we bring you stuff about computer hardware and tablets, and we answer questions. But we don't do it in any particularly excellent way, so claims Ryan Shrout, my co-host. Was that the introduction you were looking for? Something to build down to? We didn't
No. We definitely do it in an excellent fashion.
Oh.
But, you know, we do it in an excellent fashion, right? That's good enough. Right? I think the quality of the content speaks for itself. We want to underpromise and overdeliver.
Okay.
Rather than the other way around. It just makes for smoother sailing down the road. We can't get in trouble that way.
We got to give a shout out to @TrollDan on the Twitters, who said @Patrick Norton, @Ryan Shrout, Twitch, the best hardware podcast that I download with Patrick Norton on the Twit network. Pound box quote. there are a couple other pretty awesome ones out there, but that one made me really, really happy. So. It is an interesting. I'm not going to get into to the network working group request for comments 1149, the standard for transmission of IP datagrams on avian carriers or internet over carrier pigeon. It was a thing that happened in 1990, but the documents are out there if you search for them. We should probably talk about the big news this week. It nearly killed the Padres' career and the minds and souls of several people up here in the cottage, the brick house, I still call it the cottage, last night when they got their Titanfall on. PC Titanfall this week, Xbox One Titanfall next week. The servers got a wee bit hammered, did they, Mr. Shrout?
Man, that was annoying, right? So it launched Monday night at midnight Eastern time, and we had planned on doing a live stream Tuesday night. So actually, the actual day that it was released, and throughout the day we were trying it. We had my Xbox One here, and we had it on the PC, and we could not, complete a match reliably. And I thought that would make for a pretty awful live stream. So we decided to not do it on Tuesday night. And then we had the podcast on Wednesday night. We've got Twitch on Thursday night. So it kind of got pushed back. We may see if we can stream something interesting on it tomorrow over the weekend. But from what I have played of it, now that I've been able to play it, it's quite fun. I know that some guys here at Twit were playing it on the stream last night as well. They obviously had a blast. It's an interesting game. So we did a story on PC Perspective, kind of like doing a PC build for Titanfall. And what's interesting is that the game is brand new, and it's like this flagship title, and it's what everybody has been looking forward to for a while, but it's not overly demanding on graphics hardware or on any portion of the hardware, to be clear, right? So like the least expensive system we build, which I want to be frank up front, is not like we didn't target, we're going to build the cheapest system possible to play Titanfall. This was just, here's a system that is pretty good, that will have no problem playing Titanfall at 1080p with all the settings maxed out, which will give you noticeably better image quality than what you have on the Xbox One. And that system is based on a Core i3-4330 processor, an H87 motherboard, right? So that's kind of like the very mainstream lines of motherboard. 8 gigs of memory, and then the workhorse here is the GTX 750 Ti, which you can get for anywhere from $150 to $180, depending on which model and overclock you get.
Right.
And with a standard hard drive and a standard case, and you've got to pay for an operating system, you can get all of that for $780. If you don't need an operating system, you're talking about under $700, right? So $650 to $700 for a fully functional PC that will do much more than just play games, but it will also play Titanfall really well at 1080p. You know, if you jump up to the higher resolution, 25 by 14, you know, really the only change that you probably have to have is a little bit more horsepower on the graphics card. We went with the GTX 770. You could maybe even get away with a GTX 760 or a 280 R9 card from AMD. But this gives you a little bit more headroom going forward. And then for 4K even, you know, this is one of the few games that's new and exciting that you'll be able to get away playing 4K with a single graphics card, and you could do that with like a GTX 780 Ti. I figure if you have a $2,900 monitor, chances are you can afford a $700 video card. So I think that just makes sense.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, I thought so. You know, so these were just some suggested builds that we had,
right?
You know, for that type of thing. It's you know, this is from the original developers, or some of the original developers, rather, of Call of Duty. And Call of Duty has never been a barn burner in terms of graphics hardware. They build it to run on the most amount of hardware available because they want to sell it to as many people as possible. They want it to be as mainstream of a title as possible. And they seem to have done a pretty good job of that. You know, we've seen people who are talking about playing it on GTX 460s, right? With not maxed out settings, but able to play it on that, which is kind of interesting. So it's a game that's going to depend more on its you know, capability to keep you entertained in multiplayer gaming sessions, as opposed to pure graphic fidelity, right? Pure interest because of the gaming engine.
Yeah, I mean, you're not running through this going, hey, watch while I shoot this curtain so you can see the amazing, you know, insert name of obscure 3D effect, right? Whether it's some particularly interesting strain of particle effects or something that comes after that. But what's been interesting for me is talking to a couple people at our games group who do not like the first-person shooters, and they were just compelled to play this. Like, once somebody got their hands on the controller or the keyboard, they didn't want to stop. And that's a big, for me, for gameplay to take precedence over things like, you know, what weird ass DirectX 11 you know, call can we take advantage of?
Sure.
I think that's important. I think it's a good thing, and I think it makes it more accessible. And hey, since Microsoft apparently paid out the nose to make it exclusive on Xbox One and not PlayStation 4, I love the fact that what's going to be one of the biggest games on the Xbox One I can make look better with not a lot of money on my gaming PC. So that's exciting to me. Plus, it makes people go nuts in the comments, the tweets, and the email threads. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch the game evolve, and if it takes off the way I think everybody at this point thinks it is. And I love the fact that it doesn't require you to have all of the money tied up in a gaming system. I mean, I think, you know, did you pull out one of the $350 system with the 750 Ti and throw Titanfall on that yet?
No, but it clearly would have been able to play it. Right, because we were playing much more demanding games on those systems. You know, when we did that article. You know, it's one of the benefits of PC gaming, and it's also one of the downfalls is the huge kind of range of hardware that you can have, and a PC game is supposed to run on. Right. So, you know, I agree that having a game that will run on all systems is a good thing, but there are developers that do it well so that a game will scale, right? It's not easy to do, but you can have a game that will take advantage of graphics cards like the 780 Ti or the R9 290X and look substantially better or perform substantially better in certain ways, while they can always tone things down to play on a 750 Ti or, you know, a lower end card, maybe even integrated graphics. So you can definitely do both. And this was just one of the games, you know, I think, again, because they were really targeting the Xbox One with this launch, that you might be able to assign this the moniker of like a console port. Right. I mean, it's only on the Xbox One and it's only on PC. It will be coming to the 360 soon. So they're obviously targeting lower end platforms, right? Obviously, you got to think if they've got to run this game on the Xbox 360 as well as the Xbox One, you know, they're not going to be able to turn up all of the dials easily for the PC. So, but regardless, it's a fun game.
What are we looking at for frame rates at this point on PC Play?
I mean, with that 750 Ti system, you're going to be able to run 1080p at 60 frames a second.
Wow.
And I think as of now, the game has a hard lock at 60.
Okay.
You can disable VSync and it will go below 60. It's
Just what I've
smoothly.
always wanted.
Right. Yeah. But it won't go above 60. I think I read about a hack that you can get it to trick it to go up to 120 if you kind of create a fake resolution with 120 hertz type interface, and you don't really actually have it. It'll do that. But I think I saw a tweet from one of the developers from one of the Respawn guys saying that they were going to implement a patch that allow you to unlock the frame cap and go above that if you wanted. So if that's something you're interested in.
Will a 750 Ti hit the 60 frames per second on a QHD monitor at 2560 by 1440? Or is it going to start straining?
I think that'll start straining. Okay. If we max out the image quality settings, you're going to have trouble with that.
Okay.
It'll hit it sometimes, but not all the time, and you want it to be as close to 60 or above all of the time if you can manage it.
So basically, run what you brung. If it doesn't run, throw a 750 Ti at it if you have a 1080p monitor, and then start building out your system from there. Any particular issues with memory performance? I mean, it sounds like this is a Core i3, 4 gigabytes of memory, whatever hard drive you have your grubby little hands on, and ideally a GTX 750 Ti or higher for the graphics.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have the texture settings set to insane level, that they kind of recommend a 3 gigabyte frame buffer, 3 gigabytes of memory on the GPU, which, if you have a 280, 290, a GTX 780, that's plenty for all that. But the only other thing worth noting, I guess, is the fact that it's a 51 gigabyte install. Which apparently is a lot of is uncompressed audio. And it was one of the, apparently somebody interviewed one of the developers and they said, well, we kind of did that so, even low-end PCs wouldn't have to worry about decompressing audio on the fly to play it back. So we have all these, every language, all uncompressed audio ready to play back on the system. And it's kind of ridiculous to think about, because if you go back 5 or 6 years, if you find a PC that can't decompress an MP3 file or an OGG file at 15x real time, I'm going to be surprised, right? I'm not quite sure. Either that developer kind of had a skewed perspective on why they did that, or the whole company had like some kind of weird idea of where the bottlenecks in a modern PC rested. So you got to have 50 gigs free. If you're running an SSD, that's an issue. Like we had actually issues on our test beds because I actually had downloaded it in one system and had put it in a big, like a stored zip file, right? Non-compressed, but just so you can just move one file across the network instead of thousands. And made the mistake of, well, I'll just copy the zip file over here and then I'll unzip it onto the thing. It's like, well, you can't do that because now you got to have 100 and something gigs free, because you got to have the zip file and the folder that it's going to decompress into. So that was a little bit of a pain, but we worked it out.
It's so annoying when that happens. It's funny, while we're talking about bottlenecks, Sebastian had a good write-up for PCPro.com. Kingston's HyperX Predator 2660 hertz megahertz DDR3 memory review. We've been talking about this for a while, because there's certain things that just keep coming back that maybe don't have the impact they used to in terms of overall system performance. One of those is memory speed, it's interesting looking at the results on this, because Sebastian looked at like Samsung 1600 megahertz CL11, G-Skill Sniper 2133 megahertz CL10, Kingston HyperX 2666 megahertz at CL11, and it's 7-zip decompressing, you can save 60 seconds, 58 seconds out of 375 seconds. Rendering is almost exactly the same. Video game performance is almost exactly the same. And Sebastian, I think, pretty well wraps it up here. His memory, because it's interesting to look at the benchmarks and look at how they effectively overclock this. But memory is more than just a checkbox on the system build, but past a certain point, any additional performance will come down to either the needs of your build, i.e. integrated or discrete graphics, or specific applications. It's fast. It runs at its rate of specification. It really doesn't seem like it's going to do a whole lot for performance on any actual thing you might be running on your system. Not that this was particularly surprising, but at this point, it's like this is a huge increase over the stock clocking, and even then, you're just not really seeing a lot on memory speed delivering much in the way of a performance improvement.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of something we've known, unless you're looking at memory bandwidth benchmarks or the very, very few applications that specifically depend on it. The only place where you really see it is on integrated graphics. And even then, AMD sees a much better scaling capability with higher memory speed than Intel's HD 4000 or 5000 graphics do. It's just the GPU and the AMD APUs are quite a bit more powerful. They're built based on the architecture are kind of based on systems on discrete graphic solutions that have tons of memory bandwidth. So you feed it a little bit more, it's going to take full advantage of it. So, and then you get into that whole catch-22 of, are you going to buy expensive overclocked system memory for a system that is supposed to be inexpensive, right? Your whole goal of building like an APU integrated graphics only gaming system is you're trying to save some money. Otherwise, you'd buy a discrete graphics card, right? But now if you're going to invest in significantly more expensive memory, maybe you should just buy a discrete video card instead. So that's kind of the unfortunate place where system memory is, which explains why you look at what Corsair has done, used to be the dominant player in system memory, and they're like, we should probably maybe do some other things because it's hard to differentiate there.
No, it's definitely become a sort of whatever's cheapest, drop it in your box kind of situation. Although I will say I do stick to branded memory, and it's usually Corsair. And hey, they're a California company. NVIDIA GeForce GTX 800M series launches with battery boost technology. I'm envisioning hooking up a mobile, graphically powerful laptop to the battery on my truck. What's going on here, man?
You could do that. You could probably do that. So there's two things. They're launching the 800 series of mobile GPUs, GTX 800M. Some of it is Kepler, some of it is Maxwell. So the high-end parts, the 880M, the 870M, those are still Kepler-based parts. There are speed bumps accordingly across the whole pack here. If you look at that table there, the 780M goes to the 880M. You see just clock speeds increases. But if you go the 770 to the 870M, you're actually seeing a good clock speed increase as well as a jump from 960 through to 1344 GPU cores. More interestingly, perhaps, are what you get in the 860 and 850 parts. The GTX 860M is interesting in that NVIDIA will be offering it in both Kepler and Maxwell derivatives. Maxwell is the GPU architecture that powers the GTX 750 Ti on the desktop. It's the only desktop part powered by Maxwell today. And we always kind of knew, because Maxwell was targeting highly power efficient systems, that it was going to find its way into mobile design sooner than it would otherwise. What's confusing is having both Kepler and Maxwell on 860 is kind of odd. So now the Kepler's going to have 1152 cores, 1152 cores. Maxwell's going to have 640 cores. They're going to run at different clock speeds. NVIDIA claims that, well, these performance levels are the same. So that's how we market. The branding is based on the performance level. So an 860M will perform like an 860M or very, very similarly accordingly. The problem with that is if you get an 860M based on Maxwell, it's going to be much more power efficient, which means it'll run cooler, it could probably be thinner, and it'll probably get better battery life. So my guess is NVIDIA has a lot, either they can't make as many Maxwell parts as they would like, or they have a lot of Kepler parts left that are going to sell at a discount in order to kind of finish off that round of sales. So either way, it's interesting to see those in there.
Talk to me about battery boost and talk to me more about. It's kind of funny. It's like I'm looking at the GTX 860M and it says 1152 or 640 cores. Is that throttling down the number of cores to minimize battery usage, or are those two completely separate parts?
Wait, where do you see that again?
Under the chart with the GTX 860M.
Oh, right. No. So that's just two separate chips actually that they're going to make.
That's what I thought you said, but I was like,
Yeah.
So 640 cores are going to equal 1152 cores in performance.
Correct, because the 640 cores are running at 1,029 megahertz. The 1152 are running at 797, and they're different architectures. So the 640 are more efficient.
Okay.
You're going to get more performance per core, and those cores are running at higher clocks. So in the end, those two parts are going to be equal in performance when they come out in systems. At least that's what NVIDIA is telling us. So
I was going to say, have you benchmarked this yet?
No. I'm supposed to have, I think I'm getting an MSI system in this week, but it's actually going to be on the 880M, the high-end side. So, we kind of know what to expect from that. But you mentioned battery boost. Battery boost is actually a software technology that they're introducing to kind of coincide with GeForce Experience and Optimus. And battery boost, as the name would imply, attempts to give you more battery life while you're gaming. And that's kind of, gaming laptops have always had this thing where you almost nobody even really tests battery life while you're gaming because it's so minimal, why even bother? So what they're doing is they're doing some little magic tidbits inside the GPU with some software running the driver. And you can see that they're going to be able to increase battery life while you're gaming. You can see there, like the gray line is the baseline. This is a reference system running an hour and 26 minutes. Going up to an hour and 47 minutes with frame rate targeting, and then with battery boost, 2 hours and 11 minutes. So that's a pretty good increase in battery life. Frame rate targeting is pretty simple. If you have a game that can run on your laptop between, let's say, 60 and 70 frames per second, if you cap that at 30 frames per second, you say, only show me 30 frames per second, then any of the power that it would normally use going over 30 frames per second is saved power. Right, so you're kind of limiting how fast the GPU is going to be rendering in order to improve your battery life in the long run. Right, that's an easy way to get some extra battery life out of a gaming system. It does mean that your gameplay experience is going to be affected because of it. Right, the difference of playing at 60 frames per second and playing at 30 frames per second is noticeable in a lot of cases. They've got examples of Borderlands 2, BioShock Infinite, and then the big guy there is League of Legends, where you get up to 197% battery life improvement while gaming on the battery. They also do other stuff besides just frame rate limiting. They won't go into a whole lot of what that is. They're not. They claim that they're improving the overall efficiency of the whole platform, but when I prodded them on it, they are not actively changing like CPU power states. They don't have control over any of that. So my guess is somewhere in the driver, they're doing things like more efficient compiling of those shaders that are running, or maybe they're doing them in larger batches or smaller batches, whichever they found out to be more efficient for power consumption. The whole idea is if you can get the processor, the main CPU, to throttle down and go hurry up and wait is what they call it, right? If you can get it to boost up and then lower its power consumption and go almost idle for any amount of time, and then boost up and go idle again, you're going to save battery life and thus extend your gaming time as well. So it's a good idea. They're even going to have, this is implemented through their GeForce Experience software. So it'll be automatic. If you're unplugged and you start a game, it will run by default. They will let you adjust what that target frame rate is. If you think 30 is too slow, you can raise it up to 50. If you think, I can deal with 20 in StarCraft or whatever it is, you can pull it down to 20 frames per second and get a little bit more out of it. And they'll even, in a future release of GFE that I think will be out next month, enable you to have different image quality settings at the same time. So while you're on battery, maybe you have AA turned up, and you have image quality, turned up to very high, but when you're on battery, turn it down to medium with no AA, and that will lessen the amount of horsepower that your GPU has to draw. Combine that with other things, and that should be able to extend battery life a little bit additionally as well. So it's a pretty interesting technology, actually. I haven't seen it working yet, and I think we'll be able to do that next week. But it's one of those things that if it's implemented and it helps by 50%, that's a pretty healthy increase. I I don't know how many. I guess I'll be curious how many people are going to want to game on battery anyway. I think there are people that would if they had the capability to, right? And people just kind of assume that it's going to be 30 minutes, so why bother?
Yeah, I'm torn between being excited about them making gameplay by battery power being something in the neighborhood of effective, and then being like, who games that isn't plugged into a wall on a laptop? Which may not be a fair assessment, but anything that brings more battery life is, generally speaking, a good thing.
Yeah.
Even better, I got excited. Silverstone Argon Series AR01 CPU cooler review. I, ladies and gentlemen, am a big fan of inexpensive coolers. And I am an even bigger fan. I've decided there needs to be more baby blue inside my system. And I didn't realize that until I looked at this graph, which I think is one of the things you heard me giggling about in the background. Scott in the chat room caught that there. It's pretty. I like the baby blue. It's a classic design, right? You're looking at a bunch of heat pipes wrapped around through fins with a fan sucking air through them. I mean, this is pretty much how heat sinks are made these days. Interesting that they basically, instead of having a big old block of copper or some other bonding unification something plate thing underneath the heat pipes, they're basically laying the heat pipes directly on top of the CPU. But this is, Newegg.com for $30 after $5 mail-in rebate, Amazon for $35 with Prime, PerformancePCs.com for $35. This is a really simple cooler. It's maybe not the best thing if you have a ton of ridiculous amount of heat coming out of your processor, but it's gonna probably perform better than stock. It's gonna be quieter. Maury pointed out the build and the machining quality of the cooler. The price is really cheap. The fan noise and single fan configuration is super light. He pointed out no nickel plating to protect the copper heat pipes and CPU mating surface. So, is he worried about? Is the thermal compound not going to keep the copper from trying to bond itself to the top of your CPU? Or
no, I don't think that's really that big of a concern.
Okay.
Really. It just lacks some of the polish of some of the higher end systems, and I don't mean physically,
right?
But
no pun intended. Except well, it's funny,
probably.
But you're looking at Thermalright Silver Arrow SBE. Okay, it's 5 degrees cooler at low. Should be at high settings, but it's pretty much at idle. It's running pretty much the same as everything else. And I'm like, what's the cost on the Thermalright Silver Arrow these days?
I don't know that actually.
Hold on, I have the internet, ladies and gentlemen.
It's going to be steeper than this for sure. Because that's one of the benefits of this one is that it is a low cost solution, like $29.99 to $35.
Well, let's see.
Where you go.
Somewhere in here. Maybe it's not being sold currently.
The Silver Arrow?
Yeah, the Silver Arrow. Which is the best name ever, but
it is. It is. I don't really see it for sale either way. I see a lot of reviews. We did one. Well, it was only in October. Surely it'd still be available. Looks like I see it for $86.99.
So basically, you're getting most of the cooling for less than half the price.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you read through the review that Maury did, I mean, he talks about there are a couple areas where it's lessened. If you put the 2 fans on it instead of the single, it doesn't actually increase performance really. But it's going to be much better than what you get, out of the box with a Core i5 or whatever processor you happen to buy. And I like the coloring, actually.
I do. No, I wasn't mocking it. I actually was like, it's pretty.
Like, yeah, no, it is like it's like a bright, cheerful color. I'm like, well, you never see that in PC components anymore.
It's always blood red or skulls or blood red skulls or pulsating LEDs with blood red skulls. Not that there appears to be a skull obsession in the PC world. Well, it's funny, right? Because if you look at a picture of the Silver Arrow, I think you're looking at 1, 2. Let's see if I can actually count this, because this thumbnail picture is about the size of a postage stamp on my system here. But I think we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 heat pipes. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8. There's more than twice as many heat pipes on the Silver Arrow, which would imply, you know what I mean, it can move more therms. It can move more BTUs off of the plate.
Yeah.
Still though, that's pretty cool. And that all those benchmarks are run with an Ivy bridge running at stock settings. So you know.
I think he has some Haswell results in there too. If you want to, there are some differences. The Haswell parts run a little bit hotter, more dense. So
yeah, I mean, stock settings, it's pretty close. I mean, you know what? Even overclocked on a Haswell, you're still looking at like a 6-degree delta at max core. You know, maybe a 9-degree delta at max core average. And at idle, it's, you know, a degree. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely differences between it and the higher end parts, but still way better than stock. Still way better than stock.
I agree. We should take a moment to thank our sponsors at ting.com, ladies and gentlemen. If you have a Sprint iPhone 5, you can move that to Ting now. You don't have to choose a plan anymore. Just pay for what you use. It's a pretty good deal. I am a Ting customer. Ting is a no BS mobile service, or an MNVO, a reseller of the nationwide Sprint network, which means they got a good network behind them. And they're really simple. Unlimited devices on one plan. Each device on the plan costs a flat $6 a month. And it's pretty cool. One of the things I like about Ting is they're passing along the savings to you. They got a better deal from Sprint. They actually cut cut the rates they charge you, which is pretty amazing, right? Because Ting's, well, this is pretty cool. So if you take a look at Ting's tools, their interface is really amazing. They've got a really good customer service thing going on. Whenever I have actually used the customer service at a company and don't hate the company afterwards, that's actually a big deal. So one of the things they want you to do is look at your monthly usage. And what happens is if you go from like small to medium usage, right, rather than hitting you with an extra $4,000 for every extra text that Junior sent to his soon-to-be ex-girlfriend, it just bumps you up to the next bucket, right? So they charge you more if you use more, and it's not a huge amount. There's no penalties. There's no overage, punitive overage charges. Everything's included. I don't have to pay $30 a month for tethering. I don't have to pay extra for it to be a hotspot, for three-way calling, for call forwarding. And there's no contracts. There's no there's no early termination fee going on there. Matter of fact, Ting, up to a point, will help you pay off your termination fee if you're moving from another company to Ting. The deal is, right, the way they're able to give this to you is they want you to buy your own hardware. They don't want to play some game where you think you're getting an $800 phone for $200, and the reality is they're making $1,500 off an $800 phone because they've figured out nifty ways to bury your costs into their sort of business unit. And it's funny, right? AT&T's finally changing their billing plans. T-Mobile's been doing this. It's a big deal. And I got to say, I've been really impressed with Ting, using them both for my wireless modem, for a Galaxy Note 2 I brought on board. Their online support is great. The people are nice. Who says the people are nice after they talk to a phone company?
Not very many people.
I'm just saying. Look, bring your Sprint mobile device to Ting. Buy your mobile device from Ting. They get it up and running. If you're looking at your phone bill and screaming, you should take a look at the savings calculator up at the Ting.com website. You might be shocked and disturbed with how much you're overpaying for your cell phone service. And we'd like you to visit Ting today at twitch.ting.com. Save money, better manage your mobile phone usage with Ting, and seriously, you might be able to save a lot of coin each and every month. Go check out the Ting savings calculator, and because you are a valued viewer of This Week in Computer Hardware, you can save $25 on your first Ting device when you sign up. Do us a favor, go to twitch.ting.com, start saving today. And we want to thank Ting for supporting this podcast and helping us bring it to you each and every week. Ting, people, twitch.ting.com, save some money, and then save a lot of money. That's all I'm saying. I mobile phone bills. Yeah. Ting, people, go check it out. Tell them we sent you. I was kind of excited about this, being a keyboard nerd, and especially after some of the mechanical switch keyboards we saw at CES. Razer has designed new mechanical switches. Is this legit, or is this some sort of early April Fool's announcement?
No, apparently I didn't realize that the patent on cherry switches expired recently.
Really?
Yeah. I learned this last night from my own podcast as well. And so I think you'll start to see several of these kind of copies or iterations on that type of switch design for keyboards. And Razer, who makes a lot of gaming peripherals, PC gaming peripherals. They even make some console ones that are beloved. They're mice and keyboards in particular. So they've kind of gone through and they're making their own mechanical switches. And there's a video that kind of demonstrates how they're different. They get into like the where the actual, what's the word I'm looking for? The actual switch takes place, right? The distance between the actual keystroke and where the button actually gets pressed. And so they're releasing 2 different switches, green and orange, which
not to be confused with red or blue or brown
or brown or or clear. They had a clear as well. Razer will not manufacture these key modules, but they look like Cherry MX switches. Could guess who their third-party manufacturers are, but they did push their own specifications onto it. So they didn't like open up a manufacturing plant or anything, but they clearly did a lot of research and figure out what they're going to build. So they can get away from paying Cherry for whatever their licensing fees were to buy these switches. They get to make their own switches. They can adjust them. If you watch the video, they apparently took feedback from professional gamers, which obviously Patrick and I both are.
People don't realize how much money you and I make each year from our Titanfall winnings.
Oh yeah. I mean, we should have picked a game that's been out before now.
Don't try to play Bejeweled against me for money.
Yeah, or threes. That's a good one. So apparently in the Black Widow tournament, and there'll be variants of both of those in the green and the orange switches as well, starting to ship as early as late March.
Wow.
So it's obviously not something that they just started working on. They've been ready for kind of the patent to be over so they can start selling these. And it's pretty cool, right? I do not consider myself a keyboard snob at all.
I do. Not
except
you, me.
for I know what I like, right? Like I like the Lenovo keyboard on my laptop,
right?
But for my desktop, I used generic keyboards for a while, and we talked about it a while ago. I got one of those Topre, I don't know how to pronounce it. Those electrostatic keyboards that I have loved, right? Like I type on it every day now. That's where all my articles get written, and so I am very interested in now trying out the wide world of switches that exist to see which ones I like. But I don't know. I'm curious to try these out.
I am too. I mean, I'm somebody who still has a stash of a half dozen IBM Model M keyboards.
This doesn't surprise me.
No, it probably shouldn't. Can I throw some love to a friend of mine's business while we're talking about mechanical switches? Tech Keys, TECHKEYS.US, and it's just if you want to look at something fun, look at custom keys that'll snap on to the key. Basically, you pop off the key cover and you can snap on custom keys that they're designing, and they're kind of fun. They do full sets, different colors. They do all sorts of different pop-ups. The artisan ones are really amazing. My personal kind of horrifying one, if you click on artisan, then you see the molar keys, which is kind of awful and kind of awesome. Fortunately, they don't look too realistic or it'd be kind of horrifying. The flocked keycaps are pretty good. Which are essentially fluffy keycaps. But it's been funny. There's just a whole scene around a mechanical keyboard. If simply having a superior typing experience is not enough for you, and you want to do something just a little bit beyond cutting not that you ever need to cut a glass window on the side of a PC anymore, covering up the glass window on the side of your PC, definitely check out techkeys.us and tell them we sent you. It's good stuff. The alien glow-in-the-dark keys are pretty awesome too. And the entire key sets are pretty awesome too. But I also like mechanical switches and popping them off. You got hands-on with something I've been really curious about, Intel's Haswell Nook with the 2.5-inch hard disk drive.
This one's not that. It's actually the only difference between this and the Haswell Nook that came out last year is that this one has support for 2.5-inch hard drive. I don't know if you remember, I didn't remember it initially, But when you took apart the Nook, both I think the original one, the Ivy Bridge one, and then the Haswell one, on the inside there was a SATA port,
Right.
and a SATA power port connection, right? And I remember thinking, why is that there? And I thought at the time, well, okay, this is, if somebody wants to use this board and implement it in a different chassis,
Right.
they can do that. Well, as it turns out, what they did was for this one, they made the device a little bit taller, and then they implemented that bracket on top of it that allows you to install a standard 2.5-inch hard drive. And you can see the SATA port there in those photos as well. So it just connects to the SATA port and connects to the power port. And you can use any 2.5-inch hard drive. It can be an SSD. It can be a standard spindle-based drive. But you don't lose any of the features or capacity of anything else, right? So you can still have an mSATA SSD and a 2.5-inch drive, or you can have just an mSATA, or you can have just a 2.5-inch. So it just expands on a little bit. It makes it a little bit taller. So it's not quite as svelte looking, I guess. But these are still really, really, really tiny devices. So it's interesting. And the Intel Nooks are still kind of expensive. I'm trying to remember what was the bare bones cost on that. I have it in here, $411, I think. So anywhere from $399 to $415 is what you're going to pay for. That's the bare bones. So that does not include storage, and it does not include wireless. And despite the picture on that Amazon link, if you look at the second photo, it will show you the height difference there, because that is the correct sized unit, not the top picture. The top picture is a liar for whatever reason.
I keep waiting for them to come out with a dual Ethernet Nook box, because there's been a couple of the competitors in that space. Have been doing that. You can
do that with a USB 3 dongle, or something like that. Like you could put a second Ethernet port on it if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, I just don't know if I want to try to get like monowall running with a USB Ethernet dongle. But maybe it's easy to do that now. But it's like Minix has a small form factor, or a mini form factor system with dual Ethernet ports. Bricks, I think, has one, don't they? Or Gigabyte, I should say.
A one with 2 gigabit Ethernet? I don't know.
I could be wrong.
Possibly. They have a lot of variants. Yeah. One of which is the next topic there with the projector item.
Bring it up, dude.
I mean, so the Bricks projector, as the name would imply, has a projector in it.
Dun, dun, dun.
It's actually been out for a little while. We just finally got around to actually playing with one. It is essentially a Nook on the bottom,
right,
and a projector on the top, and it's in a fairly small form factor. It's got a Core i3 4010 in it, which is a fairly low end part. I think it's probably amongst the lowest end, core based parts in the Haswell line. It's dual core, hyper threaded, 1.7 gigahertz. It'll do your basic stuff, but nothing too dramatic. The projector on top is a 75 lumen mini projector that can operate independently of the system below it. So when you turn on the system, the projector doesn't automatically turn on. On the back, there's a separate button that you push to actually power on the projector. And it has a separate mini HDMI input, so you can actually hook up anything else to it and project that as well. So
did you have to like turn off all the lights in the neighborhood to be able to see this on the wall?
Not really. Surprisingly not. I mean, it's, if we tried it with the studio lights on first, that obviously wasn't going to work very well. But we had it shining on, we have these white pull down shades, and we had it shining on that with the shade half up. Right. And so it was on the top of it, and you could see it, right? Like it was usable. It wasn't super bright, but it was definitely a usable experience. The downside of it is that the resolution of it is WVGA, which, if you don't know what that is 854 by 480.
Which is just like it's yeah.
I mean, it's really low. Doing things like watching YouTube videos on it seemed fine.
Right.
If you wanted to play a game on it, like I think we showed Peggle there on that video, it plays fine. When you browse a website, websites aren't built for that type of resolution. So you're going to see a horizontal scroll bar on the bottom of a lot of websites, right? If you hook up an HDMI input into it, like we hooked up our Xbox One to it, and we played Titanfall through the projector on the Bricks projector. And it worked, except, even though we're sending it 1080p, it's outputting a large image, but it's outputting it at 854 by 480. So you're going to lose some quality that way. It has other outputs. It has HDMI output and it has DisplayPort output on the PC part of it. And you can use any two of those independently. You can use the projector plus the HDMI, or the projector plus the mini DisplayPort, or you can use just HDMI and DisplayPort. You can use any two of those in combination. So the projector is connected internally. You don't have to like run an HDMI cable between the output and input or anything.
Well, that's good.
Which is, at least that. In and of itself, it's a very novel device. Like, I was looking around, I was like, what can we use this for? And I thought up some good ways that I would use this. Like, I've always wanted a full-time display of the real-time statistics of the website somewhere on a monitor. And I was like, well, this is an easy way to do it. I can move it wherever I want to move it. I can have it, I was going to have it shine on one of these shades. The main downside to it is that the fan, if you've ever used projectors, their fans are loud.
Yes.
And this is not an exception. And this is a very small fan. And thus it is not a quiet fan at all.
Thus it is spinning very fast.
Yes. And it's pretty annoying. Had Gigabyte not requested this unit back, I was going to kind of rip open the projector part of it, cut that fan, and maybe like put a larger like 120 fan on it someplace and just make it quieter for our personal use, which is something you could do. It obviously kind of defeats the purpose, but it depends on if you can find an interesting use case for it. Gigabyte says, hey, if you're a business person, you can take this with you, to meetings and set up sales things that way. And I thought, yeah, you could do that, or you could just buy a mini projector and hook it up to your laptop, right? It just kind of depends on what you want to do. The pricing wise, I do want to mention this because it seems really expensive. Where was it? It's $550 on Newegg, which is a lot considering if you just look at the hardware that's in it. It's a bare bones kit. You have to buy storage and memory, but it's I guess mini projectors of about this brightness are about $250 to $300 on their own. So it's not as expensive as I thought it was, I guess, right? You're paying $200 something for the computer. You're paying $200 something for the projector. You can use the projector independently if you want to, and then you happen to have a PC attached to it as well. So I'd be curious what other people think about something like this. Is it useful, or is this just kind of a unique, quirky gadget?
I'm going to vote for unique, quirky gadget.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I just, I don't know.
If it was closer to 1080p, I mean, if it's funny, did you try to run Netflix on it?
I did not actually, no.
You should try to run run Netflix on it and get back to me.
Okay, fair enough.
Because you know what we say at Techzilla, if it doesn't run Netflix yet, it's not a real operating system or platform. Which may be harsh, but fair. Twitch, TDYCH at twit.tv is the email address. We love your questions. You can also tweet at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton because we're very creative. We should probably mention AMD, big week next week, Game Developers Conference. You're going to be in San Francisco. I'm going to be chasing you down to talk about DirectX 12 and whether or not it's going to crush AMD's hopes and dreams. But perhaps the most frightening picture we've seen in years, several hundred episodes of This Week in Computer Hardware, AMD teasing dual GPU graphics cards with Ryan Shrout as twins.
It's scary, isn't it? It's scary. Like I get a random doorbell ring this morning. I go down there. I get it. It's a FedEx envelope. I open it up. There's an envelope inside that says "Top Secret," and I go, "Oh, great! What marketing thing is this?" I know who it's from because I recognize the address of the PR company. Right. It's from AMD's PR company. And I open it up, and there's this picture of me. And I recognize the picture immediately. It's a picture somebody took at me at CES in 2005, I want to say. Maybe
you were still so young.
Yeah, I was. And those are on my, actually, ironically, on my face are NVIDIA 3D Vision glasses before it launched. I think AMD didn't know that. Otherwise, they would have picked a different picture. But it was like a mirrored photo of me, and it says, "Isn't 2 better than 1?" And it had a hashtag on it, like 2 better than 1. And with all the rumors going around of a dual R9 290 graphics card, this is quite obviously the beginning of their marketing for for that product.
So many bad jokes I want to make about yet another AMD card I won't be able to buy in the near future.
Yeah. Trust me, we were making them too. Yeah.
We were going to talk about questions. We got an email from Nathan. During the winter, whenever my children touch the external front-facing USB ports in my case, why are they doing that? The computer case either freezes or shuts off, and they giggle because they got a shock. This does not happen during the summer. My assumption is that the vast amount of static electricity that we experience only in winter and the rest of the house is to blame. Is there a good way to ground my PC to my house? Is my case poorly grounded inside or something? The computer isn't anything special. AMD 1090T, AMD Radeon 5770, 8 gigs of RAM, a 600-watt PCU from OCZ, a Cooler Master Storm Scout case, and Nathan says he watches the show religiously, and we thank you for that. Do you think it's poor grounding between the case and the motherboard? Or the PSU and the motherboard?
I think that's what it is, because I actually had a system here. My primary system that I used to use work at the office did the same thing.
Right.
And it would be as simple as like I was sitting in my chair, I would spin around and I would get up to go leave, and like my hand would kind of brush the front of the case and it would do it. Or even more frustrating is like I would be plugging in a USB drive, and like as soon as the drive makes contact with the metal on the outside,
your system would reboot.
It's just, I was like, it was the word, like, oh. Finally, I just actually moved that hardware into a different case. On that system, I disconnected the front panel USB 3 headers, and it stopped, obviously. And then I ended up just building a different system in a different case. But I think it does have to do with the grounding, maybe not of the ports to the motherboard, but even like the metal surrounding the ports to the case, to the motherboard, to the power supply, and back into the wall and all that stuff. I don't really know how to. What would you do to fix that, though?
I mean, you could, in theory, like screw or solder a wire to the case to one of the grounding points on the motherboard, which should be properly grounded from your power supply, which should be properly grounded to your house. I mean, in theory, right? The way cases are designed is that, assuming you have a functioning ground in your house, and at least around here where electricity was often installed by the least intelligent member of a family, not that I'm bitter about some of the apartments I've lived in, who didn't understand that the green wire actually is supposed to be connected inside of something. My personal favorite being a landlord that put in grounded sockets but didn't actually connect the grounded part to anything. Nice. Yeah, don't get me started. So one of the things you want to make sure is are your outlets properly grounded? Are you, did somebody cut the grounding pin off of your power cable? You should have if you've got a decent enough power supply. Is the motherboard isolated from the case? Is the case grounded? I've read there's anecdotal evidence. Some people have connected like wires from the case to one of the screw mounts on the motherboard and isolated it that way. I'm trying to think like what else could you do? Part of what you want to do is make sure that your home wiring is properly grounded and that you haven't clipped anything off of it. I'm trying to think of like what else you could do inside of that. Now, this is one of those moments where I was hoping the chat room would explode with suggestions.
They have not, huh? I think we can ask some people that make cases that might do this. I'd be curious what case he was actually using that was doing this, and I'd like to see if it matches up with what I was doing, what I was using with this. My particular problem was on a Corsair case. I don't remember the exact one. It was a bit of an older one.
I mean, you could also argue
I could talk with their engineers and say, hey, what is this? Oh, no, he says the Cooler Master Storm Scout case is what he's using.
I mean, it's funny. The voltages you're working with on static electricity are actually kind of ridiculous. You know what I mean? Because you're essentially, so you walk across the floor, right? You're in a dry part of the country. It's winter, so there's even less humidity in the air. Your shoes go across a carpet, or you walk down, like we have this crazy tile hallway at my office, and by the end of it, I can pretty much light up most of Lower Manhattan when I touch the door lock. what happens, you have an imbalance of electrical charges between your surface and the surface it's touching. And it's kind of amazing, actually, how much electricity is involved in that. Let's see. Human being is representative. So for modeling, this is out of Wikipedia, for modeling the effect of static discharge on sensitive electronic devices, a human being is represented as a capacitor of 100 picofarads, which is not a lot, charged to a voltage of 4,000 to 35,000 volts, which is a lot.
Yes.
When touching an object, this energy is discharged in less than a microsecond. So it's millijoules. It's a tiny amount of electricity, but it's a whole bunch of voltage that you're throwing at something when you touch it. So one of the answers to this may be, you may not be able to alleviate the problem by, playing around with the grounding of the case. I mean, you should always, if you're listening to our podcast, you're probably a little geeky. You probably should know whether or not your house is properly grounded. You should probably make sure that the grounding is connected to, a piece of pipe or a piece of copper that's hammered like 6 feet into the earth. Check the local code for your local area. And but you also, there's things you can do by adding a humidifier into your house. You might make the house a lot more comfortable, generate a lot less static electricity, and by the way, also have fewer issues with your system rebooting itself every time one of your kids walk up to it and poke it. So, it's it's something to think about. Moisture in the air is going to alleviate the humidity in a lot of ways. There's lots of other things you can do to kind of cut down on the static buildup in your house, all of which are probably worth considering. Along with, Ryan's going to check with some case manufacturers, and I'm going to shuffle my feet a lot in the office this week and think a lot about this subject.
Just walk by all of your coworkers' computers, touch the front of them, and say, "Oh, nope, yours doesn't do it. Good job." And then when one does, well, you should get that looked at.
Trying to generate static electricity right now.
It's a lot easier to do out here in the cold than it is out there. No.
Yeah, it was like 75 degrees. So, me sweating today was probably enough to raise the humidity inside of the brick house to keep it from happening. One more question before we go. David says, "G'day, Patrick and Ryan. First of all, I want to say longtime viewer, first-time emailer. Love the show." Thank you, David. Okay, 2 years ago, I purchased the amazing Cat Leap monitor. Games look great, although my MSI GTX 580 is taking a beating. I'm looking at spending around $500 Australian, which could get me either something like a GTX 770 with 4 gigabytes or the AT side, on the AT side, an R9 290 with 4 gigabytes, because apparently they don't mine Bitcoin in Australia. My question is, what card will get the best bang for my buck? Looking forward to your answer, as I've already eBayed my 580 and currently running onboard graphics. LOL. Thanks so much, guys. Keep up the great podcast, David. And thank you for all the kind words, David. 770 versus R90. I think the first question is, can you find an R90 for sale? And if you can, in theory, should it beat the 770? I would think so.
Yeah. Yeah, the R9 290 will beat the 770. Yeah.
So get that one.
Yeah, so if they're the same price where he lives, that's surprising.
Yeah.
Because a GTX 770 should be about in US dollars, it's about 330 to 340, like for a good kind of like overclocked model. Even its MSRP here, the R9 290 should be 399.
Right.
And you can't really even find it for like 490, except for like 499 here. So if I don't know how that translates into his currency, or if maybe he's not even really saying that they're both the same price, because here in the U.S., an R9 290 is about the same price as a 780 now, because of the overcharging for the R9 290s.
Right.
At that case, a 780 is easily the better performing card. But if you cut $100 off the R9 290 price, it's a much more compelling option, and that would probably be what I would recommend. If he thinks like if financially those are the same options, then yeah, definitely the R9 290 is going to be the better selection there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's always weird to, you've always got to remember that the situation of product availability and product pricing here in the States, which is obviously what I deal with every day, is not always what it's going to be, across the world. And we've seen in our comment sections on PCPer.com that several times, right? Oh, well, in Europe, we don't have any problems getting the R9 290. Well, great. Send some of those over here. Because
there's a business there.
Do. Yeah,
eBay.
How much does shipping cost from Germany? It probably less than the markup on the 290 the 290X cards. As they
All
went,
you need is $1 and a desperate Bitcoiner, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
One last question before we go.
Sure.
Okay, Bobby writes in, hey, your show talks a lot on the importance of the GPU in a system. I'm wondering if you can discuss audio. What's the difference in motherboard audio, a Creative Labs ZXR, and AMD's True Audio technology, my Radeon R7 260X? I would like to have great audio considering I watch Blu-ray on my PC, etc. So one of the things we say on AC Nation, a podcast to do with Robert Heron, is that audio is more than half of the experience. And it's amazing what going from a bad set of speakers in your HD TV to, a decent set of speakers to a 5.1 surround system. There's some spectacular differences you can make, especially if your room's properly set up and if the person doing the soundtrack for the movie did their homework. It's incredible. Gameplay also. So what's been going on and off for years is the idea of having a better DAC, digital to analog converter. It's funny because we were talking about this a bunch on Techzilla last week. I've been playing around with the Dragonfly, which is by AudioQuest, and it is a USB external DAC, and it does some pretty sophisticated stuff, including having its own clock to deal with sort of, kind of like the USB clock and audio clocks are no bueno. They work, but, essentially, like, in the case of Dragonfly, it's built around this 24-bit ESS Saber digital analog converter. Which you would normally find in an expensive CD player or something like an Oppo Blu-ray player. It corrects sort of the timing errors. Now, whether or not you hear the timing errors, what's been interesting is for people who are not audio enthusiasts, i.e. not audio geeks or not, audiophiles, I've had them grab a bunch of their songs and play it through the Dragonfly, and they all kind of go, oh, it sounds better. I'm not really sure why, but it sounds better. Here's the thing: is right now the audio in your computer, the audio in your motherboard is probably really, really good. 5 years ago there was a lot of crappy audio on motherboards. 10 years ago it was almost entirely crappy audio on motherboards, whether it was a laptop or a desktop. So what's going on? What you're seeing is, AMD's True Audio technology is essentially a DAC that's built into the GPU. And it's a really interesting concept, right? Basically, it does a lot of the stuff that you would traditionally get from a Creative Labs sound card, programmable sound effects. It's handling sort of voice channels. It handles echoes and convolution reverb. And what it does is offer a lot of effects that you probably don't need and that programmers probably aren't going to take advantage of when they're building games. But what it should do is do a really good job pumping out, pumping out bits, or if you have an, analog jack on there. And it's funny, I've never played around with AMD's True Audio. I don't think there's any analog outs in any of the AMD cards, right? I mean, basically, they're just doing a digital signal processor inside the card that allows you to do effects, right? So that's not really. So what's going to happen, right? So True Audio, you can do a whole bunch of stuff to play around with the sound, and then it still gets sent either to the DAC on the motherboard or the DAC in your AV receiver. So when you get in the Creative Sound Blaster ZXR, it's a PCI Express sound card. It's a really interesting product, right? Because they've got the main board, a breakout board, and this crazy little box that's a volume knob, which I love. I'm a big fan of external volume knobs. And then it also, the accessible audio control module, or ACM. The ACM has, basically a built-in mic array. It's got headphone and mic plugs, and there's a big old knob on the top to let you adjust the headphone levels. It does, Soundcore 3D and the SPX Pro Studio stuff, which basically is, 3D sound effects, which probably don't sound, like concert hall. Like if I come into your house and your AVR is set to concert hall, I'll immediately turn it off because it doesn't sound like Radio City Music Hall, and it doesn't sound like what the artist intended when they made the record, and it certainly doesn't sound like what the audio engineer on the movie intended. So what it does do is it's got really, really good analog to digital converters, good digital analog converters. It'll handle 24-bit 190 kilohertz audio. It's interesting, and it's got a really high signal to noise ratio, like 124 dB. They'll tell you it's 34 times better than motherboard audio, but basically it just means, there's more space for the music to operate in, which is the biggest oversimplification I've made, at least this month. But the idea, though, is that instead of having a super price-constrained chunk of components on the motherboard, you now have a big PCI Express board with hopefully some better capacitors, some better power supply, some better parts handling it. Another option that's really, really good, Asus Zonar series is fantastic. This was probably the first time I thought any respect had been given to a PC part in Stereophile magazine, and they put a Zonar card several years ago on the front cover of Stereophile, which was Stereophile's magazine way of saying, hey, digital audio doesn't entirely suck, and holy crap, you can get amazing audio out of a computer. And that was a big deal, at least for me. So there's, the short answer is the audio in your computer is probably pretty good. The source of the audio, i.e. having a Blu-ray or a lossless audio track, is going to have a lot, kind of like the source, i.e. like, DTH master audio or lossless or Dolby Digital at one end, and then having a really good set of headphones and speakers at the other end. I think it's like 80% of the problem. The processing is another 20%, and the amplification is another 120%. So I just got myself up to 360% of the problem. But I would start by making sure you had a decent set of speakers or an AVR powering a set of surround sound speakers for Blu-rays. You know what I mean? Because Blu-rays and surround sound for game playback is something that's very, very different from really, really enjoying, standard stereo recordings. So, start with the motherboard, start with the audio on your motherboard. If you're running the HDMI out from your computer to an AV receiver, the AV receiver is doing all the digital analog conversion and then sending the audio to your speakers. Make sure you've got a decent set of speakers. If you're a headphone listener, then looking for one of the many, sort of headphone amp DAC items out there. The AudioQuest Dragonfly is pretty cool. The 1.0 version's on sale right now for $100 as they replace it with the 1.2. There's lots of options out there, and it's kind of a bottomless pit. But essentially, motherboard audio is your baseline. The Creative Labs is kind of a best of. Asus Labs, Zonar, and then the hundreds of external digital analog converters that are available. And AMD True Audio Technology is a bunch of processing on the GPU. If you want great audio, you need great, at least a decent set of headphones or speakers. And if you have speakers and you want a decent AVR, if it's surround sound. So I could go on for several more hours, but Ryan will fall asleep, Josh will weep, and they will shut the lights off here in the brick house. So
no, you know infinitely more about the audio side of things than I do. So I put these questions in here specifically because I know this is one of the areas that you can offer a lot in, and that I have nothing based on except for I use motherboard audio for the most part still. Right?
And I got to say that the nice thing is motherboard audio is pretty good these days, and Q.
It used to be junk.
Yeah,
Worst.
There's a reason why audio cards kind of disappeared from most people's shopping lists for years, and that's because motherboard audio was pretty good, or they were shoving HDMI out to a TV, and the audio conversion was being handled in the TV or in the AVR.
If you can get digital audio out of your motherboard, you kind of, the one kind of downside the motherboard audio still gets you is the potential for noise. If you can get digital audio out of it, you kind of eliminate that.
Yeah.
That's still we still see that some here. Even noise over analog
can be horrendous. Especially if the case is open. If you're running like 9 GPUs inside the box, it's a slightly
I might do that
aging.
sometimes.
Yeah.
We might run a lot of GPUs. It's possible.
It's possible, but in most situations, it's not too bad. Can you step up from the audio in your motherboard? Absolutely. There's just about 3,000 different ways to do it, and if you run an HDMI out of your GPU to an audio-visual receiver, an AVR, you can get a great AVR starting at $250, $300 now from Denon or Onkyo, and there's some other options out there. Then all that, the digital to analog conversion, all that stuff is happening in the AV receiver, and it's not really an issue. Assuming you pass all of the digital audio format through the HDMI, but that's a whole nother question I don't want to get into right now. Because that one will even put me to sleep. Oh my goodness. Any exciting, obviously you're coming out for the Great Game Developers Conference, so hopefully I'll track you down in San Francisco next week. And
that's pretty much what my focus is now at this point is kind of making sure my meetings and everything are set up for the Game Developers Conference next week out there, with the big news pending about however much Microsoft is going to divulge about DirectX 12. It could be a lot, it could be a little. We just don't really know yet. So that will be the big push for sure.
It's going to be fun. We had a really fun episode of Die Trying this week. The FreeNAS, a couple of the FreeNAS developers. I should kind of say is Jordan Hubbard, who is the project lead for FreeNAS, the CTO at IX Systems, co-founder of FreeBSD, and had a lot to do with the kernel inside of OS X for a bunch of years at Apple. So he's essentially the caretaker for the FreeNAS project. And then James Nixon, who runs the web servers down at IX Systems and has some pretty serious FreeNAS plugin issues. They came up to help us kind of build the best possible FreeNAS box, and that was a really fun episode for us. We got to sort of answer a lot of the questions that came out of our first FreeNAS build on Die Trying, and you can check that out on dietrying.com or youtube.com/dietrying. It's interesting to look at the case, sort of the supporting case for ECC RAM. Sort of like a server grade motherboard and RAM versus whatever's in the back of your closet for a FreeNAS build. But that was fun and very geeky. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So probably no GPUs next week, or possibly a new GPU next week.
No, we won't have new GPUs next week. We may have some reviews. I think we're going to try to get a roundup of some of the GTX 750 Ti overclocked models that have come out. Hopefully I can get that done before I head out for GDC.
Nice.
But there won't be, spoiler alert, no brand new GPUs before next week. Yeah.
A week without a new GPU is like a week without sunshine here at the Twitch podcast.
Or a week without puppies.
Or a week without puppies.
Oh.
Poor Ryan's going to spend several days without puppies. Get all the puppy you can this weekend.
Take him with me.
Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.